Okay, good morning and welcome to Grace. This morning we're going to paraphrase Acts chapter 21. We're going to find a principle and then put it into practice. So Acts 20 left off with the Ephesian elders all just like weeping over Paul as he was leaving. And then he heads off and then he sets sail because he's going to be eventually heading back to Jerusalem. And when he gets to Tyre, a bunch of Christians and disciples, they come to Paul, and through the Spirit they're telling Paul, don't go to Jerusalem. And then Paul hears that and he keeps going, and they prayed, and he got on the ship and everyone went home. Okay. Then when he gets to Caesarea, more Jews, or Christians, Jewish Christians, they come to him, and one of them is Agabus, who is a prophet. And Agabus says, listen, whoever goes to the person wearing this belt, takes Paul's belt, the person wearing this belt will be bound up and turned over to the Romans. And everyone starts weeping and crying, to which Paul goes, why are you guys breaking my heart? I know what I'm ready not only to be in prison, but I'm ready to die. And remember, in Acts 20, the Lord told him that he would be in prison and face affliction in every city that he went. And so he's not afraid of this. So now, what they eventually do, and I love this part, when we heard this, we and the people there urged him not to go up to Jerusalem. Paul says, why you break my heart? And since he would not be persuaded, we ceased and said, let the will of the Lord be done. So, then Paul heads back to Jerusalem. He first visits James, who was the younger, oldest brother of Jesus. If that makes sense. And he was a leader of the Jerusalem church. And he goes and visits James, tells all the things that are happening all over the world. Everyone's excited about that. Then he heads to the temple to worship. And when he's there, there are some Jews from Antioch who have been furious at Paul, and they see Paul, and then they make an assumption, whether they actually made an assumption or just made an accusation, unclear. But they said Paul brought a non-Jew, a Gentile, into the temple. And I've mentioned this before a lot, but the temple had this section that says the court of Gentiles, and then there was the court of Israel. And it said, you have only yourself to blame for your untimely death if you pass this point. That's for all Gentiles. And so they were going to say, well, we need to put Paul to death because he brought somebody into the temple. Now, as an uproar is created, they're ready to take Paul and stone him, but then all of a sudden the Roman soldiers see this, and they see that this is something crazy going on, so they take Paul, arrest him, take him into the barracks, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And Paul goes in Greek to the Roman soldier, hey, can I talk to the people? And he's like, wait a minute, aren't you the Egyptian that led the revolution, 4,000 people into the desert? He's like, no, I'm Paul. I'm from a great city, and I'm from Tarsus in Cilicia, and so yeah, I'm a Roman citizen. And then I beg you to permit me to speak to people. And remember, the thing I think we forget about is Roman citizens were a big deal. Like the Roman soldiers worked for the citizens, so to speak. And so, okay, all right, so he permits him to speak, and then he goes and he speaks to all the people in Hebrew. And that's where chapter 21 leads off. And so really the principle I've derived from this is that Paul had a calling from God to go to Jerusalem and die. Or he doesn't actually die in Jerusalem, right? But to go and be in prison, which eventually lead to his death. And he'd been told that every city he would go, he would face affliction, imprisonment, and he's got a mission to go to Jerusalem. Now, it could have been that Paul was wrong, right? It could have been Paul shouldn't have gone to Jerusalem, that he needed to go other cities first, and all the prophets and all the people in the Spirit talking were correct, and Paul just disregarded it and went anyway. That's possible. Or it could be that in the Spirit, right, you have a vision of Paul going and getting imprisoned and getting persecuted in Jerusalem. And then from that, you would say, nobody would want that. And so you say, Paul, here's the vision I have. You're going to be imprisoned and you're going to go to jail and it's not going to be good for you, don't go. Because you have an emotional attachment to Paul and you want what you feel is best for him. And so this is where it's really difficult sometimes to discern the will of God, because clearly Paul was called to go to Jerusalem, because that's what the Lord said. And I do appreciate that in verse 14 of 21. And since he would not be persuaded, we ceased and said, let the will of the Lord be done. And so I do feel like there was this great affection for Paul, that there was this great friction, and in the spirit they saw him getting imprisoned, and so they went against the Lord's will by saying, don't do it, even though they had a correct vision. So it's tough. It's tough. And I think the principle here is God leads people even in persecution, even into places that would seem like not for their best. But we know God's always about two things, his glory and our good. And ultimately, it was for Paul's good that he would go be persecuted, eventually die, and he get to be with Jesus. And to like, well, what a waste of a person. He has all this talent, all this skill, all this God-given gifting to go and preach the gospel, and yet God leads him straight to his death in a Roman prison. But the one thing I've found when people are going through persecution is that God gives them the faith to endure. Which is why Paul says, I'm ready. And the thing that was breaking his heart wasn't necessarily the fact that he would be broken, but rather he's looking at all these people crying who love him. And so I guess what I want us to see is that there's an affection that we have for people, and there's an affection we have for our own way. And I want us to be a people that puts God's will first. And so the practice is, am I following my will, or am I following his will, no matter where it goes? In my workplace, in school, in the day-to-day social activities on social media, am I following the Lord, even if it means my own demise? Am I willing to go that far? That's where the Lord is calling. That's a tough question. One we need to wrestle with. One, we've always got to be ready for Jesus to return. But mostly because we need to be ready to give a reason for the hope that we have. We do it with gentleness and respect. But people are going to ask, why? Why would you go through that? And people might even say, if God is so good, why would he put you through that? And we also know that God is so good that he did the ultimate unfair thing, sending his son Jesus to die on the cross, and he rose from the dead. And Paul's message and mission is saying, tell everybody about what Jesus has done. And he did. And he fulfilled his calling. And now, although it was a painful couple years, Paul is still rejoicing in heaven at the side of Jesus, experiencing unbelievable amounts of joy. And that is where our hope is. Our hope isn't stuck in this life of having our best life today. Although, if you can have a great life, have a great life. But what I'm saying is, if that's your ultimate goal, you're going to be missing something. And if your ultimate goal is safety, if your ultimate goal is like, I just want to be safe, I don't want to avoid the persecution, then you might be missing something very powerful that God's wanting to speak to you. You might be missing something very powerful that God's wanting to see you experience. So, whose will are you doing? Are you doing yours, or are you doing the Lord's? Constant question you got to ask. Wrap your head around that. God, thank you so much for your word and for the power of your spirit, that you would be directing us wherever we go. And Lord, I pray for people to be involved in prayer, to be involved in your work, even when it costs them. It costs them reputation, might cost them a job, and maybe at some point might even cost them their life, because they truly believe that you, Jesus, died on the cross, rose from the dead, and our hope is pinned upon you. And so, Lord, wherever that leads us, I pray we would follow. I pray we would go. I pray we would be a people like Paul, that even when people are weeping and crying and asking us not to do what God has called us to do, we would simply do it, not out of a sense of independence, but a sense of dependence on you, Lord. Lord, you're so good, and we worship you, even in the midst of a pandemic time. We trust you. In Jesus' name we pray.